Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. This is Courtney with the LSA, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our webinar series. Today's webinar is the 2019 State of Location Marketing and is brought to you by our guest presenters Tessin from Uberall and Charles from the LSA. During the webinar, please feel free to type any questions that you have in the question box on the screen, and we'll address those after the presentation. Before we get started, just a few in-house issues to take care of. Next slide, please. I want to let everyone know that this webinar will be recorded and available within 48 hours. We will email everyone that registered with a link, and then you can also view our past webinars on our website by looking under the Insights tab and clicking on Webinars. Next slide, please. Additionally, I wanted to let everyone know that we do have an event coming up. Our Locology Engage SaaS SMB event will take place in Washington, D.C. on June 3rd and 4th. This is the only event that brings local SMB users and SaaS technology providers together in the same room for open discussion, education, and networking. And if you'd like to learn more, you can visit locology.com. So with that, let's get started. Over to you, Tessin and Charles.
Hello, everyone. This is Charles Laughlin from the LSA. Thank you, Courtney, and hello, Tessin, and thank you for joining us today. So yes, the topic is state of location marketing. So we got a couple things to talk about today. But first, I do want to mention one thing. In addition to working with the LSA, I also host the LSA's Above the Cloud podcast, and I want to make sure that if you haven't listened to it, please check it out wherever you get your podcasts. It's all about the topic that we're going to be covering at the Locology Engage, which is how to succeed in small business SaaS. So moving on to our topic today, again, joined by Tessin from Uberall, and we're going to talk a little bit about sort of themes in location marketing and why it's such a critical factor in 2019 for anyone who's selling to small business. And then we're going to take a deeper dive into the voice component, and Tessin will take that over and talk about a recent white paper on voice optimization that Uberall has recently published, with a treasure trove of data that he'll get into. But first of all, I'm going to just share what our agenda is. Again, a sort of a definition of location marketing, what we mean when we say that, when we use that term, why it's such a dominant issue in 2019 for marketers, and then sort of a little checklist for those who are doing location marketing for their clients, what they need to focus on, where they need to put their energy. And then we'll move into the second part of our webinar today, which is the whole notion of voice search readiness. And Tessin will take that piece and talk about what Uberall has uncovered on that topic. So before I get started, Tessin, why don't you just say hello and say hi to everybody, and we'll get into it.
Great, thanks, Charles. Hey, thanks for having me. Really looking forward to doing this with you. Appreciate it.
Great, cool. All right, so defining what is location marketing. I think we have an educated audience today, so I don't want to get too basic here, but we want to just be clear on what we're speaking of when we speak about location marketing. And it's a collection of tactics that sort of combine to define marketing to help consumers find, evaluate, and transact with businesses based on location. And we think of that as having 5 basic pieces. Some may have other lists they would put together, but I think this covers the basics of what location marketing is. It's listings management, presence, websites, mobile optimized sites, social presence, ratings and reviews, visual, and voice. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these components, and all of this will be sort of blown out in some greater detail in a paper that we'll be publishing soon through the LSA in partnership with Uberall. So let's go on. Talk about this in some detail. So when we talk about location marketing as being a dominant driver in 2019, it's been, not to be clear, it's been important for a while, but we think sort of a confluence of factors is making it of even greater importance in 2019, which is why we're talking about it, why we're doing a paper on it. And there's several trends that sort of add up to make location marketing such a dominant factor. This year, One, we'll get into each of these in a little bit of detail. The ubiquity of smartphones, not a big story there, but it certainly sort of overhangs everything. The notion of near me searches being such a dominant search behavior now. The empowered consumer kind of hangs over all of this as well. This notion of consumers having so much information at their hands that has led to so much higher expectations that they have about the experiences that they have, and that puts a lot of pressure on marketers to have great content out there to satisfy consumers. The notion of reviews and review management, even more important, not just having reviews, but managing them effectively. And then voice coming into its own, which again, I'm not going to talk in much depth about voice because Tehsin has a lot of detail about that. Okay, when we talk about ubiquitous smartphones, everyone has one. Everyone, I'm sure, on this webinar has probably two. And so we all know this. 73% have a smartphone. Mobile search surpassed desktop a while ago. That's kind of an old story at this point. And about 70% of search activity and other search queries are mobile or mobile oriented. So it's certain website behavior, or excuse me, smartphone behavior is dominant, and it's led to sort of the dominance of mobile search. So that sort of leads into the next point, which is this notion that near me search is becoming a normal behavior. Uberall recently did some research. Again, we'll talk about this piece in some detail in the white paper coming up. Only about 18% of all adults have never conducted a near me search. So it's almost ubiquitous behavior. And there's a strong generational component to this, which again is not surprising. And that kind of permeates a lot of these points, particularly when we start talking about reviews and visual content and other things we're going to touch on. This idea of a generational driver. Just a quick aside, I do one of the things I work with LSA is tech adoption research, which is measuring small business adoption of cloud technology to run their businesses. In that research, the generational component is dominant in terms of adoption of technology by business owners who are millennial, Gen Z, 18 to 34, that range. That if you look at consumers, this sort of the same drivers exist where younger consumers exhibit much different behavior than older consumers. And here, just 8% of millennials say they have never conducted a near me search. Quite honestly, I'm surprised it wasn't less than 8%, but it's still a significantly lower number than the overall sample. So, near me searches means that content must be optimized for location. Otherwise, you'll have a poor search result, or your business or your clients' businesses will lose out because their data is not optimized, or their content's not optimized for location. And again, this notion, the other big driver of why location marketing dominates in 2019 is this notion of empowered consumers. So, I think we all sort of know this intuitively. If you look at every sort of disruption that's occurred in the consumer market, it's been a customer-oriented brand overtaking a brand that didn't serve its customers well, or an industry that didn't serve its customers well. If you're looking at Uber taking over cabs, the examples are endless where customer experience is a driver of disruption. And that's all because of the expectations that consumers have. And there's a zillion stats you could cite about that sort of point out how empowered consumers are demanding an experience that's very difficult to deliver in many cases. And if they don't receive that experience, they will look elsewhere. One data point that's sort of relevant to listings and location data is Bright Local conducted a survey recently that found about 41%. They asked consumers, how do they respond to having a search experience where they find a bad address or an incorrect address on a local listing. And 41%, there was a variety of responses, but 41% said they look elsewhere when that happens. So in other words, they could have a certain amount of brand loyalty even in this instance, but that is trumped by just a demand for that fast, accurate response. So that sort of experience trumps brand in a sense, is what we're seeing. So again, this notion of location data having to be accurate and inaccuracy being just not tolerated anymore. So, and that is only going to grow in importance, with the generational shift that we're talking about. Again, reviews, and there's some generational issues here, but overall, this is sort of overall data from another white paper LSA did recently, where we sort of asked consumers about how they feel small businesses should respond to reviews. And sort of the bigger point is that it's not enough to have reviews or to have good reviews about your business. Businesses are really expected to manage their reviews actively and authentically. And by that, it means, if there's a review that's poor, you have to respond to it, and not in some sort of automated way, but actually go on there and say, okay, sorry you had that experience, here's what we're going to do about it, or what have you. And if you look at reviews a lot, you see this in action, where businesses that really care and really sort of get this, actively respond to every review. And there's a growing consumer expectation for this. So this one data point shows that, there's an expectation that, I think it was like within 24 hours or immediately, it's, was it 42%? That's almost half expect almost immediate response to a consumer review. That's a pretty demanding expectation for a busy small business owner, but nonetheless, that's sort of what's expected now. So again, have reviews, manage reviews. That means that there's, a real need for services that help businesses do this. Okay, and finally, voice coming into its own, and this is sort of where, we'll talk a little more, we'll sort of move into the research that Tehsin has done with Uberall. Voice, if you sort of think about the in-home appliances, Alexa, tell me a joke. I mean, sort of anecdotally, everyone sort of sees these as being used for fairly mundane things. Tell me a joke, set the alarm, this or that and the other, that are sort of simple. But I think over time, these voice queries will gain in complexity. And as that happens, there will be a lot more location-based searching. There's already quite a bit. But we think that, as voice becomes more dominant, as consumers are using it for more complex searches, naturally location is going to be a key component of this. So you really there's the need to optimize content for voice has become much, much more important. And sort of I'll let Tehsin get into that more. So kind of to wrap up a little bit, the notion that, so one of the things we're talking about in the paper is this idea of a location marketing checklist, where here are the things that businesses or agencies working with businesses need to do to make sure that the business is optimized for location marketing. Obviously, it's listings accuracy and syndication are key. Your listings have to be out there on the right directories, which Tehsin will get into a little more. Accuracy, and critically important is sort of that data point I shared a moment ago about consumers moving elsewhere very quickly if they're not pleased with the accuracy, or if they don't have an almost seamless experience with listings data. There's a real price to pay for brands or local businesses when they fail to deliver that. The notion of soliciting and managing reviews, critically important, as we noted. If it's not done authentically and sort of almost in real time, there's a real sort of penalty to pay for that as well. Visual content, didn't really get into that as much, but there's a lot of, increasingly a lot of data that shows that visual content, which really basically we're talking about, we're just talking about images and video for the most part. There's some data out there showing that I think one study we found that was, I think it was from Intent Lab, 59% of consumers consider visual content more important than textual content. And I think there's another study, I think from, actually I don't have the source right in front of me, but 62% of millennials and Gen Zs almost demand visual content in their mobile searches so that they can just scroll and make fast purchase decisions. So this notion that visual content having more relevance and value than textual content is true, and it's true across categories. It's not just for for goods or for checking out restaurants and things. It's pretty much across categories. So visual content is increasingly important. And then of course voice optimization, which is probably a good transition point to hand it over to Tehsin to talk about the research that Uberall is doing. And so I am going to let Tehsin take it from here. Tehsin?
Great. Hey, thanks, Charles. Really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much for sharing those, on the back of the work you did on your white paper, which I know will be shared after this webinar. And I think, as I was sort of listening to you, my thoughts in my entire decade plus experience within the local space has been on the crux of something quite simple that we all inherently know, and it's all about essentially consumer demand. And then that on the back of a good customer experience. So as we think about that within local, ether or the local context, that to me is much more amplified because a local buyer, their attention span, their mindset is even shorter, if you will, than perhaps somebody who is, doing e-commerce or on sort of a different level. And that's, and some elements and themes sort of resonate there that I've seen throughout my career in local. And they are a bit of a contrast to what I've seen with other buyer mindsets. And those themes are, trust, community, support. A local consumer wants to support their local business, if you will, or a business that's around them. And so the good side of that, I guess, from an economic standpoint, is they're going to be less price sensitive. So there's higher profit margins, but the path to purchase is short. So if the business, whether you're a brick and mortar mom and pop or you're part of a huge enterprise, you're still a physical location. And if you're not putting your best foot forward, there's a price to pay, and that there's going to be a loss of profitability there. So so it's interesting. Hey, by the way, Charles, we're seeing a different screen here. So I wonder if you could just go back to the slide there. I'm not sure what I'm seeing here. But anyway, so, but yeah, I think that the essence of what I was talking about was, the local consumer mindset is a really key piece for the audience to sort of understand and just be reminded of. And I think about that on an ongoing basis. Are we at Uberall doing what it is required to provide that optimal consumer experience and advocating on behalf of the small businesses? We manage about 1 million small business, brick and mortar business location data out there. And so that is something that I'm just very top of mind for me. So, and as we, go into voice search, interestingly enough, as a juxtaposition, voice search has struggled with that trust element, right? I mean, it's sometimes hit or miss. I think you mentioned this yourself, Charles, just a little while ago. But the funny thing is, location marketing is going to be a critical factor in closing that gap on trust. And I'll get into, what the work that Uberall is doing, some of the work that we did in the report that we published, as it leads to businesses just being aware of what they need to do in order to catch up on representing themselves with voice search. So with that being said, I'm sorry, Charles, I'm seeing another screen again. If you could just go back to the document or the voice search demystified. So as I get into voice search demystified, with this the original slide, a couple of stats. One, an old one, we might know this from just the fact that it's been out there in the ecosystem for a long time. This is an original prediction made by Andrew Ng, who is the chief scientist at Baidu. In 2014, he basically said voice search will constitute 50% of all search by 2020. We're there. So I'll share with you what that really means, and what the reality is. He also, by the way, and Charles, you were talking about this a few minutes ago, he included image search as part of that 50%. And so, they're sort of interesting. As a contrast, a few months back, I was up at Microsoft in Seattle. And so some of the data scientists were talking there about some of the research Bing and Microsoft are doing. And so what they said was by 2021, early adopter brands that rethink and redesign their web presence to support voice search will increase digital commerce revenue by 30%. So very interesting sort of stark contrasts in, how voice search can really drive and move the needle towards additional revenue, additional profitability. And everybody has to pay attention to this, right? Obviously the multinationals and the enterprise brands are certainly much more aware and tuned as to what they need to do to be ready for it. But the small business, and that's who we, again, like I said, advocate for, they've got to really understand and get underneath some of the inner workings of how voice search works. And that is why I think we came up with this report to just prep the market for what voice search really means. And so that's kind of what I'll talk about. But let's look at it, right? So at its core, in a nutshell, it's search delivered by voice. So it makes it more complex. There's context, which is basically, semantic search. And, if I'm asking, being in California, if I'm asking Siri, hey, Siri, where's the nearest In-N-Out Burger? We'll post a response. I can go back and write a sequential question to ask, okay, well, how about one that's open late? The Siri or Alexa or Cortana or Google Home, whatever intelligent agent of choice, is going to stay with me to go deeper into that sequence. And they're going to, the data will be there to figure it out. And what do I mean by that data? It's structured data. So it is the data that we need for it to be organized from the dumb web, which is basically how it's been. It's just been a bunch of data sitting there out there on in the ether that we are at Uberall really reorganizing to be able to feed into on a local level to the intelligent agents. And that is where location marketing is a critical component when it comes to organizing and structuring this data. If you can go to the next slide, please. So let's talk about user behavior. So this is from a little while ago, but it's the last Google study that we have. 20% of all mobile searches are conducted through voice. And if I supplement that with Bing, 25% from Bing originate from voice. A survey we did in 2019 here in Uberall found that 21% of respondents were using voice search every week. So it's sort of, it all sort of is coherent, and we're on that 20% mark. I think we are above that because the Google study is a bit older, at least a couple of years old here. So I think we are above that, but we don't have, this is the last concrete piece of evidence we have. So that being said, Google has 90% market share in mobile search. I mean, that's actually pretty astronomical. I didn't know that before I began research on, and we prepped the study that we did, but just individually, I had no idea that was the case. And, par for the course, because when we're talking about Google's machine learning, backed voice recognition, they've surpassed a 95% word accuracy rate for the English language. So that just means that, it's the threshold for human accuracy, meaning Google's AI is basically, much more accurate at understanding human search intent. So we are there. And it's just about how does this now go on and progress? And then as a community of advertisers, basically, how do we react to it? And are we going to raise our awareness level to actually be ready for it when the tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell would say, occurs? Or is everybody going to be blindsided, and then everybody will have to play catch up? My sense is that it's going to be a mix. There are going to be early adopters, and there certainly are already. But hopefully this report to this audience and to the larger community goes out and plays its part in what voice readiness really means. Next slide, please. So I think some of us on this call may be familiar with the term position zero. And that was the original term to, talk about what does it mean, as a contrast to the local search results page, which has a bunch of results that you're going to get, organic, even on the paid side, but local in nature. Well, with voice search at the moment, only one business wins. So the competition is fiercer. That means that if you're going to be that one business which can yield massive rewards, you probably need to figure out what it's going to take to get there. And again, it's based on a lot of inputs and a lot of criteria, but again, position zero kind of feeds into this voice optimization and voice result. But yes, only one business can win. One next slide, please. And so related to that, we have finished and published a report called the Voice Search Readiness Report. And it's, like I mentioned, it's an actionable look at what the opportunity is, right? So what we did was we did some pretty deep analysis around 73,000 brick and mortar businesses that we went out and assessed. And it was across categories, right? So it wasn't necessarily just small businesses. It was small businesses, mid-market, enterprise. And we came up with something called VSR. So it's called a voice search score. And it's basically how ready are you for voice search? And there is a link here that we're just going to get chatted, which is a direct link into the voice search report. If people are curious, it's about a 40-page report. It has a lot of detail, and I would highly recommend for folks to go out and just glimpse through it, just because you'll get so much more prepared, and you'll have your awareness level will rise to really understand what this really means to you, especially if you're local in nature. How are you going to compete? Again, it's the same question. I feel like we're going back in time a decade or more when Google first came out, and you had big brand enterprises like Nike, and Walmart going out and competing for the top search results. Well, here's a reiteration of that. Again, we're recycling, and now it's all about voice search. So for the small business, you can be there, you can compete. It's just you got to know what you're talking about. So this is a way to make yourself aware of what's happening. Next slide, please. So a couple of different components in regards to calculating this VSR score. So the first piece was our data science team identified two pieces, right? So critical directories. What are the directories that you really are going to need to be on in order to be, weighed in for voice search, for it to be counted as someone who has a chance? And the second component would be, what type of business information do you actually need to put out there that is going to need to be accurate? It's just going to not just be there, but it'll need to be accurate, and it'll need to be managed. And that is, you'll be shocked at what we see in terms of just glaring gaps, and how that second component just does not get satisfied. And I'll certainly get into that as well. With the next slide, here is the answer. So we had our value engineers went out and looked and basically assessed 37 directories that directly feed into voice search platforms, essential for voice search readiness. 3 are the ones that really, really, really matter. 2 are the ones that would be intuitive. And the third gets neglected, which is, again, kind of a surprise. So Google and Yelp and Google Maps are critical factors and critical directories that brick and mortar businesses need to be on and actively manage in order to be voice search ready. And Bing is, again, a really critical component as well on the directory piece that is part of the trio there. And then, when it comes to the fact that we're a global company, we track this on a global level. So we certainly have, and you can reach out to us, we have an in-market guide on every single market that would give you insights into which directories are more important when it comes to on a global level. And so we can certainly give you some insights on giving you our cheat sheet there. So please reach out to us on that, and happy to assist you more on that. With the next slide, before we get there, actually, there was one thing that I do want to mention. So another really big heavyweight within the directory ecosystem is Apple Maps. Apple Maps is a huge leader when it comes to the just massive user base, and a lot of us rely on Apple Maps to get around places. They were not a factor, so that actually really surprised me. And the reason they're not a factor is because they use Google. Siri uses Google for their search results, so Google again is factored in. But this one thing to highlight, that was a contrast and something that we uncovered as part of this search process. So on the other side of the coin, here are the critical pieces of business information that need to be on these directories in order for you to show up to be voice ready, and they are in order of importance. So address, very important. If you think about, let's go into the future and just on a lark, if you think about self-driving vehicles out there, I know a few of them have crashed over the last year or so, but let's say they all work perfectly fine, and they go out and take you where you need to go to. Well, if there's an address glitch, they're going to take you to the wrong spot. But in today's terms, yes, address really, really matters, and it is a barometer for an intelligent agent to spit out a relevant answer, or for you to be counted as an advertiser. Opening hours, critical. phone number, business name, website, and zip code. These are all critical pieces that really are an important part of what factored into the second part of what we looked at. And so, highly advocate for everybody listening out there, whether you're an agency, whether you're a brand, and advocating on behalf of your constituents, please make sure that this is, you've got this checkboxed. Next slide, please. So here's what we got wrong. In a collective, I mean, this is, I don't know whether to be surprised or not surprised, but here were the common pieces of listing information that were incorrect, either missing or incorrect. Opening hours, again, really critical. Half of the 73,000 businesses that we analyzed had incorrect or missing opening hours. The website, a third missing or incorrect websites. Location name, I mean, the name itself, almost a fourth, or actually exactly a fourth of listings incorrect. And street address, again, almost a fifth of listings incorrect. So, I mean, if I just think back, if I'm a brick and mortar, I really would want some of this information, actually, ideally, all this information just to be accurate and to be actively managed, whether I've got seasonal elements coming into this, whatever the case may be on the hours front. There's variances here that have to be actively managed, and so highly advocate for that to occur as well. Next slide, please. So perhaps not a surprise here, but yes, the enterprises of the world with brick and mortar businesses out there, representing them have an advantage. They do have more resources. They have marketing managers. They've got, SEO resources. They've got people within digital marketing who can actually go out and make some of these things actionable. And so 40% of this entire segment is covered off, and they know what they're doing, and they'll be all right. They'll show up on those voice search results and capture that market share and capture the profitability aspect of it. 36% on the mid-market, so not too far behind. And of course, SMBs, as we have seen historically, because they do it all, or they are so challenged for time and marketing resources are so thin, they are the ones that bear the brunt of just not being up to snuff from a marketing tactic standpoint. And so 25% of SMBs are at the moment ready for voice search readiness. So again, I would advocate, if you're an agency and if you have an SMB constituent base, please go out and advocate on voice search, getting ready and getting ahead of the curve to your SMB base. So that they can be represented as time progresses and as voice search gets smarter and smarter. Next slide, please. So this is just sort of a summary, right? So 1 in 5 businesses have a VSR at 5% or under. The average score was around 44%, but that's all categories including the enterprise and mid-market and SMB. As a contrast with Uberall, just because of what we do, this naturally had to go up, and so almost 96% of Uberall customers, whether through somebody we partner with, an agency and who we power, or direct brands of ours, had a VSR score of 96% or clear 96%. Across Google, Bing, and Yelp, perfectly optimized locations. Here's another little key insight. 76%, almost 77%, are using a third party. So again, this is not something that people were comfortable doing themselves. This was potentially a software solution. And so, a third party was being, secured to help alleviate this problem. SMBs, again, likely to go it alone. And so again, a critical finding there with 25%. Next slide, please. So again, if I were to just sum this up in our findings in the analysis that we did, which took us, I think, 3 months to really dig deep and really understand what we were trying to uncover here, is that we're part of the solution, right? Certainly, we do have a platform. We are an all API-driven software platform that can calculate voice search readiness, a score, and optimize clients to the highest degree of voice search readiness. And And again, the same data analysis that we've done for voice search is also applied within local search, right? So local SEO, local search optimization, same sort of theory applies. So it's sort of a 2-for-1. And again, we have been doing this, the curation, aggregation, collection, and optimization of data for some time now. So quite confident in some of the things that we're uncovering here and the message that we're delivering. But that would sort of sum it up. And next slide, please. So this is just a quick profile slide on our suite of services. So we're Uberall. We're based in San Francisco and offices all over the world. We are sort of this life cycle of this customer journey, right? So if you think about listings as we have known it traditionally, we are able to have direct two-way API integration across 120 different digital touch points, whether it's social, search, navigation, or voice. As an extension of that, and I think Charles was talking about reviews, reputation management is a critical element of this life cycle, and that's something that we also account for within our software suite with reputation management, review response. I think 84% in a survey we did of people that are engaging with reviews want a response on reviews. And if a business responds to reviews just one time, the chance of a local consumer patronizing that business goes up by 50%. So it was pretty fascinating as to what the review life cycle is encompassed. And now we're on to things like conversational commerce and chatbots and some of those elements that'll kind of play in as time progresses. As an extension of listings and reviews, we've got locator and pages, which are basically web cards. And again, this is something that can be done at scale, right? You can really have thousands of these created in a really short duration of time. They're fully SEO optimized. They can hang off a website, so you don't have to go to your webmaster to create different call to actions or to do different campaigns or to have different representations on a corporate to local level. We have a really vibrant and robust solution around locator and pages, or web cards, as I like to call them anyway. And as an extension of that, we've got automated ads. So location-based Google and Facebook ads that are easy and scalable to go out, especially for our agency business or in partners. If their core value prop is something that is adjacent to this, these are all pieces that can go into one software suite and one solution with different feature sets, and then really tied up with management tools and reporting in aggregate that looks very pretty and really makes sense. It's something that I think we've worked hard at consolidating and making sure that we're telling a story that is representative. Management tools are also a huge part of this, whether you're an enterprise business or you are a small business or you're a marketing manager with an agency wanting to understand analytics around aggregate or a la carte. We have rights-based access and a very robust tool in wanting to account for all levels of permissions. So that's just our set of services. And from a profile standpoint, the next slide, we are a SaaS business. We have offices in San Francisco, Berlin, the UK, in London, Paris, Amsterdam, and we have about 1,800 customers, including Domino's, DHL, McDonald's, Shell. The 800,000 is actually crept up. We're almost at 1 million locations now in terms of the locations we manage around the world in aggregating data and optimizing data. And on the next slide, you'll get a sense of some of the folks that we work with from a partner standpoint. And I'm sure you know some of these names. Reach Local, Vendasta, Single Platform, Hostopia, Web.com are the ones that are in the US and Canada. And then many others such as Census, One-on-One, Schluch, Italia Online on a global level.
So thank you guys for conducting the webinar today, and thanks to everyone that attended. If anyone has any other questions or you want to be connected with the speakers today, you can email us at webinars@thelsa.org. And that should be it for today. Thanks again, you guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Tehsin.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Courtney.
All right. Thanks for joining us.